Will Buxton is this week's guest on the WaterBoys Podcast. He is a big reporter in the world of Formula One racing, an award-winning broadcaster and journalist, and our first ever European guest on the show. We don't just interview people based in North America. We're trying to be a big global thing. Will, how are you doing? How are you enjoying, the F1 season is over. How are you enjoying your off season so far?
It's horrible. We're in lockdown. It's
That's
grim,
true.
man. We as if we've got the double blow because we've had Brexit, and so the supermarket shelves are like half empty because nothing's getting into the country, and then we've got COVID and the whole country's on lockdown. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of my living room and a lot of my computer, and that's about it really. I tell you, it's a weird time. It's a really weird start to the year, but happy new year. I'm very, very happy to be on this show. Very honored that I'm your first European. It's great, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, man. We're in lockdown as well, so I can't imagine that feeling could be any easier. But I'm really excited to get to talk to you and delve into these questions here. Obviously, with Formula One, the sport is Lewis Hamilton's right now. He's been the most dominant over the last how many years? He could start laying claim to being the greatest Formula One racer of all time. I mean, from my perspective as it is, I'm not sure what it might be for yours. But before we get more into what makes him so good, I'm really intrigued at how he brought the Black Lives Matter movement to the forefront in the past year. We saw him at races, putting his fist up and wearing shirts to bring attention to the movement and to racial injustice. I'm just kind of curious for your perspective on how he handled that in the sport and how other drivers kind of either sided with him or tried to work around that. How did his work with the movement affect, how people were kind of going about their lives in the paddock?
I think honestly, I think it's changed everything. Not just for the drivers, but for all of us involved in the sport. You asked the question of is Lewis the greatest of all time? And I think that where Lewis will be remembered and where Lewis will be seen as great and greater than just his achievements on the track is what he's doing off track. And that will last possibly longer even than the memory of his racing. I remember last year under the first lockdown, and we were waiting for the season to start, and the Black Lives Matter movement was gaining a lot of velocity. It was gaining a lot of traction, and Lewis sort of put a post up and basically just called the whole sport out. And my reaction at that time was, I sort of said, well, how can you say the sport is racist? And working for Formula One, they just launched a sort of a massive sort of inclusivity project the winter before. And I was quite sort of conscious of that and thinking, but there's this inclusivity project. So how do you say this? And then the more I thought about it, and I spoke to Lewis and interviewed him over the year, and I thought, just saying I'm not racist is not enough. And I think Lewis speaking out and Lewis giving oxygen to this within a sport and within a world which is upper middle class, white, male, European sport, to give it that oxygen, to allow that fire to start burning, to allow the conversation to happen that had never happened before. I got to the end of my year and realized I've not done enough. And my conceptions of not being racist is not the same as being anti-racist. And so Lewis, I think, gave all of us within the sport the time to have the conversation and to think very deeply about what we do and how we act, and whether our concept of, well, I can't see any hurdles, I can't see any boundaries, I can't see any difficulties, so they mustn't exist, means we're only seeing it from our perspective, where you can only see life through your eyes. So to take that chance, take that opportunity to see it through someone else's eyes, who has had a very different experience of it, even being, as we're discussing, potentially the greatest driver, the greatest racing driver in Formula One of all time, that this immensely talented kid who is breaking every record could have experienced such difficulties along the way, absolutely has made everybody sit up, take notice, think more about what we can do. And that's vitally, vitally important.
I certainly hope that the Formula One world has taken to his words, and even for next year, depending on how these races will look, or whatever Lewis will do, hopefully they continue that. But I want to focus my next few questions just a bit more on how good Lewis is. The fact that he's British, you're British. Do you take some kind of pride in the fact that Lewis Hamilton being the best in the world is from where you're from?
It's a funny thing. We love as British sort of people to knock our great sports stars. I don't personally, but as a nation, we tend to do that. Our press tends to tear them down. You look at someone like David Beckham, who is roundly seen as one of the greatest soccer players that's ever lived, certainly from Britain. And when he was playing football, he was hated for a large period. I think it was France '98 where he got sent off in the crucial match with Argentina, and he came back, and there were sort of dummies with wearing his shirt being lynched from buildings. That's what he came back to. He was seen as this kind of pretty boy, married to a pop star. Like he was pilloried, and it's only since he retired that he's become this great scion of what it is to be a brilliant sportsman, a true leader as a captain of his country, an ambassador for his country, and really somebody to aspire to be like. And I find it really sad that our press in particular likes to tear down the greats, and we end up looking back and saying they were great, weren't they? Why can't we say they're really great, aren't they? At the time. I love the fact that Lewis is doing what he's doing, because I remember watching him in Formula 3. I worked with him in GP2 on his way through, and just seeing somebody who, and actually in Britain, he's sort of been part of the motorsport landscape ever since he was a kid, ever since he first jumped into go-karts. Everyone looked at Lewis and everyone knew this kid was going to change everything. So just to watch how he grows, to watch his racecraft, to watch this incredible racing driver, at the peak of his powers. Yeah, he takes some pride that he's British, but mostly you just revel in watching the majesty of, as you said, like possibly one of the greatest of all time, and we're there living it, witnessing it in front of us. It's an amazing time.
So what makes Lewis so good? Is it the fact that his, as you mentioned, his racecraft, the way his attention to detail and all that stuff, is that what makes him so good? Is it the car? As someone who doesn't watch Formula One nearly as much as my partner Frank does, like I see him dominating all these different races, and then George Russell steps in when he can't race, and all of a sudden he ends up, I know he's highly touted, but he ends up almost winning a race in the car that he's in. Like what is it? Is it the car? Is it Lewis? Like what is it?
You're never going to win without a great car, but the great drivers take the car and develop it and work with the team. The driver is one part of that team. If you're not in a car that has the capability of competing for pole positions for race wins, like George Russell, as you mentioned, is in the Williams, which is the worst car of last year, he's never going to be fighting for a pole position or a win. That said, Lewis Hamilton joined Mercedes at a time where they were not the strongest team in the sport. His leadership, his direction, his feedback to the team, what he wants out of a car, working with them from not just the aerodynamic standpoint of the car, but what he needs out of the powertrain, what he needs out of the engine. When he puts his right foot down, how does he want that engine to react to the pressure that he's applying to the throttle? All of these things, Lewis has been working with them to create the car that's perfect for him. Now, George Russell stepping in and doing a great job and almost winning that race, I think shows more about George Russell's potential. Because let's not forget, the driver in that other car, in the sister car, Valtteri Bottas, who has been with that team for years, who has driven that car all year, he couldn't keep up with George. I think that says more about George than it does about the car. But obviously in Formula One, you're never gonna win unless you have the best car. It's like, would Tom Brady have been as amazing as he was and achieved all he had if he hadn't been with the Patriots? You need a good team around you, a great quarterback. If no one's catching the balls that he's sending, well, he's just got a great arm, but he's not going to get any trophies. You need the team around you. You need everything to piece itself together to be part of that. Now, Lewis has a record that no other Formula One driver has in history. He's the only driver in history to have won a race every season of his career. That shows that no matter the equipment at his disposal, he's always won a race. And it's very telling that when he left McLaren, the season after he left McLaren went from being one of the top teams to couldn't scratch together a win. Just showing how much he had been able to take a car that wasn't at the top, but keep it at the top. That's where his talent made the difference. You know, it's not going to take the worst car into being the best car, but it could take a car that on its best day in any other driver's hands would get third place and put it top. That's what a driver's talent can do. And that's what Lewis has. He has this amazing natural, some would say God-given ability. He has an incredible work ethic. As he has grown and learned in the sport, he has also developed an amazing introspection, such that in years when he hasn't had the competition on track from a rival, he's competed with himself. And so every weekend he's turned up and thought, right, what did I do last weekend? Okay, how can I improve that? Every single weekend to try to raise that level. And that's why he's unbeatable at the moment, because he's raised that level in himself. He's raised the level of everyone at his team, the car, the engine, every single facet of that team built around Lewis comes from his desire for absolute perfection. And that's why they're unstoppable.
Yeah. I think I was, when prepping for this show, I was watching your interview with Mario, or on the YouTube channel from Mario Muth. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And you said a similar thing. When it comes to Lewis, you know, you shouldn't even really look at it as right at the moment as a him versus the rest of the field, because there is a significant gap most of the time. But what's most impressive is that he competes against his own self. When an athlete can realistically just take the back seat, take it easy when that's the case, but he actually just raises the bar against himself as a driver. But
it's like when you see Usain Bolt, you know, and when Usain Bolt was setting all the records, and like the last 25 meters of the 100 meters, he's looking into the crowd and he's running sideways, you know, because he's that far ahead. Yeah, exactly, sidestepping to the line. Now imagine that Usain Bolt, you know, in those races was like, actually, I'm gonna give it everything for the full 100. You know, what could he have achieved? Where could he have gone? And that's Lewis. You know, is every time he's given it 100%. He's given it the full 100 meters until he crosses the line, and then he goes back on it and says, "Well, actually, I could have been quicker out of the blocks, or I had a little stumble there, or I could have dipped a bit quicker for the line, or you know, whatever it might be." And Lewis is constantly looking at those small details. But I think the other thing about Lewis that's given him the ability to be so good is that he has interests outside of the sport. You know, this year has very much been, as we were discussing, about something far bigger than the sport, far bigger than himself, something with global relevance and historical importance. Before that, it might have been his music, or it might have been
his dogs.
His dogs, whatever it might be, but his fashion. So, you know, he's got the label with Tommy Hilfiger and all of that. And the fact that he was able to go and throw himself into those things, you know, recorded with Christina Aguilera, for heaven's sake, and then, you know, and do his fashion line and all of that, and then come back to Formula One. And the Formula One at that point almost becomes the fun part of it, because stepping out into worlds where he's not so comfortable, that's stressful, that's, you know, hard work. He comes back to Formula One. If he can come back and be at the top of his game, the guy with the target on his back, and he's coming from, and this is like his relaxation, this is what he does to unwind. How do you beat that? How do you beat a guy who comes to compete and is unbeatable when he's just doing it for fun? Like, it's impossible to compete with that.
Yeah. Bringing you back now a few years now, Will, 6 or 7 years maybe. You participated in the Florida Winter Series as a driver, actually. Was that as a member of the press?
Yeah, so I was invited along by Ferrari to come and race in the United States. The Florida Winter Series was like an entry-level category for kids just coming out of go-karts, or who wanted to, you know, just sort of hone their skills over the winter. And there were a number of young drivers there who are now in Formula
you raced
One.
against some big names in today's game. Lance Stroll, Max Verstappen, Nicholas Latifi were all there.
Yeah, I mean, you say raced. I was on the same tarmac as them, but I couldn't claim that I raced them, because, I mean, I was turning up as this mid-30s, slightly out of shape, pretty out of shape, guy who'd never raced anything in his life. And I'm going up against 15, 16-year-old Max Verstappen, Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll was my teammate, actually. We had the same engineers.
That's hilarious.
And, you know, and what was great about this championship was it was totally open data. So you got to see everyone's overlays, and you got to see, where Max was on the throttle, who was braking where, and starting to study how Verstappen drove and how Lance drove. And it was a wonderful school and education. For me, it was an incredible education. All the things that I've spoken about for years in terms of tire degradation and, downforce and being in a slipstream, getting the toe, all things that I understood. I understood them from a physical perspective of how the physics worked, but and a theoretical perspective, but I'd never experienced them in the flesh, because who gets to do that? And so to experience that for the first time was really amazing, and gave me an incredible appreciation for what these guys do. It was a wonderful experience. I did it out in Palm Beach, so I had a good good week out in Florida, which was great. But Palm Beach is a tricky little track. It's all hairpins. So I was losing the time, give me some medium to high speed corners, I might have kept up a little bit, but it was all those slow speed corners, kept losing time.
That's awesome. As North Americans, as Canadians, I think it's fair to say that F1 isn't the most promoted sport over here, but it's one of those sports that whenever it's on TV, you're watching it because of how it's beautiful. It's a beautiful sport to watch. But one thing that we don't know as much about is the behind the scenes driver transfer talks. Like, that's something that's really unknown to us. And I was listening to an interview with Zach Brown, chief officer at McLaren, with Tom Clarkson, the Beyond the Grid podcast. And, Tom, he posed him the question, what was it like during the negotiations with Carlos Sainz leaving and then, Daniel Ricciardo entering? And Zach Brown said, we would have never let Carlos go if we weren't confident that we would be able to acquire Daniel. And obviously that's maybe one of the more easier transitions with one driver leaving, one driver entering. But could you give us a bit of a glimpse as to what goes on behind the scenes when teams are negotiating things with drivers?
Very often these things have huge lead times, massively long lead times. Daniel and McLaren first had contact when Daniel was still at Red Bull. Wow. And Daniel could kind of see the writing on the wall with Max, and that Max was going to be the focus of the team. And that's when Daniel started to look for a route out. And Zach wanted to sign him then, and very nearly did. But Daniel was looking at McLaren. McLaren were just coming out of their partnership with Honda, which had not gone very well. And thought, do I really want to be with a team that's just creeping back up? Looked at Renault and thought, well, there's an opportunity here to do something big with a factory team. Why don't I go with them? It surprised a lot of people, because the one thing that had held Daniel back a lot at Red Bull had been the Renault engines. So, it was a bit of a surprise. But Cyril, the boss at Renault, made him an offer. And at the time, Daniel thought that Renault had a better prospect for the future than McLaren. So he went to Renault. Now, he always kept the relationship up with Zach and the guys at McLaren, such that when he realized the Renault plan wasn't going to work out, just picked up the phone to McLaren again and goes, hey guys, that thing we nearly did a couple of years ago, how about we pick that back up again? And then it's back in. Everyone's talking to everyone all the time. Has Lewis had conversations with Ferrari? You bet. Has he had conversations with Red Bull? You bet. Everyone has conversations with everyone all the time. Just so if that opportunity ever comes up, they're straight in there and, hey, how about it? It's crazy. It's not like other sports. There isn't a particular period when the transfers are done. There isn't. It would be totally great if there was like a draft, like the kids coming out of Formula 2, Formula 3, if there was a draft at the end of the year for an F1 team to pick them up as a reserve driver or whatever it might be. That would be super cool. Or we just got like a month window like we do with soccer, and then deadline day is big news, and it'd be so cool. But we don't have that. So these deals can be done at any time. I remember Sergio Perez, who's now signed for Red Bull for this year, which is great for him. When he first joined Formula One, he was in massive demand, and Ferrari offered him Ferrari always offer pre-contracts. So it'll be like, we're giving you a pre-contract now, and in 1 year's time, we want you to race for us. So end of 2012, it would have been for like 2014. We want you to race for us. Do one more season with Sauber and then come race for us in 2014. And he turned it down to go and race for McLaren to replace Lewis Hamilton. Because at the time, right, you've got Ferrari in a year, or you've got McLaren now. So I'll go McLaren now. So that annoyed Ferrari. So we never got to look in at Ferrari again. But the deal with McLaren only lasted 1 year. So, you know, all these things are just, it's juggling these balls up in the air all the time. It's crazy what it is to be a Formula One driver manager. They are, you know, they never stop.
That's really interesting. Just hearing this talk of all these different transfers and all these different drivers talking to other teams, it makes me think of how in other leagues we talk about all these, you know, players looking at other teams and superstars possibly teaming up with other superstars. But I feel as if with how individualistic the sport of F1 is, you probably won't ever get a situation where like a Lewis Hamilton and like a Sebastian Vettel would ever want to be on the same team. There's no way that would be a thing, right?
I'm not sure. You know, I think ultimately, you know, the one person you got to beat is your teammate, because they're the only person, as we were talking about earlier with, you know, with George stepping into that Mercedes. You've got to beat your teammate. That's the only barometer you've got, is the person that has the same identical car as you. So if you can step in and do the job and beat them, that's all you've got to do. We as fans obviously would love to see the greats against each other, but the problem that happens when you have two alphas is they'll lock horns. You know, the last time we had that was Rosberg and Hamilton when they were teammates. You know, they'd grown up together as teammates through karting and were great friends. I remember the first time they were both on the podium together in Australia. I can't remember what the year was, but they were hugging, jumping up and down like kids, like just so excited for each other. And then they became these mortal enemies because they were in the best car in the field. Two drivers going head to head, and they hated each other. They properly ruined their relationship. And you look back at, you know, Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, one of the all-time great sporting rivalries, and they were teammates. You know, can you ever have two drivers at the same level as teammates? We all, as fans, want to see it. You know, when Sebastian Vettel learned that he wasn't going to be retained by Ferrari at the start of last season, we were talking to Toto Wolff, the boss of Mercedes, and like, come on, man, how about it? Seb and Lewis, just for 1 year. Just do it for 1 year. You can't lose. Everyone will love it. Just put them in the same car and go. And of course, Toto was just like, oh yeah, it would be fantastic. Then they're never going to do it, but you always have that hope that you're going to get two alphas next to each other. You know, it's sometimes they can draw the best out of each other, but very rarely. Most of the time, it just ends in chaos, destruction, and that can really set a team back. You know, particularly if it's physical contact on the track, because then the team is losing money, and the team don't get any money for the drivers' championship. They get all their money for the team championship, the constructors' championship. So they want both cars finishing the race. If you get to a situation where your drivers hate each other so much they're taking each other out of the race, that affects how much money you make at the end of the day. So it's it's a shame though. We all want it.
Yeah, that would be fun though. Just changing gears a little bit here. I want to get to a sense of. I get the sense you probably travel a lot for your job, going from different track to different track. That's true. That's true. Back when we could do those things safely. Yes. What's your favorite track to be at, favorite atmosphere? We won't be hurt if you don't say the Canadian Grand Prix, even though we are a bit biased being in Montreal. And I've been there once. It was a great time. But I'm very curious about what your favorite track and atmosphere is.
I got to say, for a city that embraces the race, there probably isn't anywhere like Montreal. And I'm not just saying that because it's you guys. Genuinely, it's really the only city that every shop front has something themed towards F1, and the whole city just gets on board. It's wonderful. You feel that F1 is present when you're there in the city. You don't get that everywhere, and I think Montreal really is one of the few that does it well and does it like that. I love Montreal. Really missed going last year. In terms of the track, I love Suzuka in Japan. It is just such a monstrous circuit, and the Japanese fans are just wonderful. Atmosphere, Brazil is knockout. Mexico is unreal, and the Mexican food is pretty outstanding as well. So even though I'm allergic to avocado, so
Really?
yeah, hell, it's not good. It's definitely not in Mexico City. We're really lucky, you know. We get to go to some great places. I love Singapore as well. I really adore Singapore. But yeah, they're my. Oh, and Budapest. I love Budapest. Great city, and really cool track as well. And it always comes just before the summer holiday, so it's like a last day of school type affair. Like everyone's starting to relax a little bit. The race is always a little bit crazy because of that. The sun is always blasting down onto the circuit. Cool little track in a natural bowl, so wherever you are, you can see loads of what's going on the track. And yeah, beautiful city, great culture, amazing history. Love Budapest.
Wow. There's a lot of great options here. Wow.
I mean, here's the thing. This year, there's supposed to be 23 races. So you're not, if the full calendar happens, you're not short of options. Been really lucky. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years now and have a lot of air miles. Been to a lot of places, but not seen a lot of places. You know, I've been to China, I forget how many times now, like 15, 16 times, but I've never been to the wall, never been to the Great Wall of China. Flown over it, but I've never seen it. You know, never
you just
been
like
there.
Don't have time, or
no time. You fly in, go to the hotel racetrack, hotel racetrack, hotel racetrack, hotel racetrack, hotel, airport, home, and that's it. 23 times a year. So it's, you know, I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong. But there's, you know, it's a vocation, not a vacation.
Yeah. I like that term. You mentioned you've been around the sport for about 20 years, over 20 years. In your opinion, what has the sport improved the most over the last 20 years? And conversely, what aspects do you miss the most from when you started covering the sport for Formula One magazine?
Oh, goodness me. That's a really good question. What has it improved the most?
You can circle back if you want.
No, that's good. Safety. Safety has improved tremendously over the last 20 years. You know, you look at that awful crash that befell Romain Grosjean in Bahrain last year. It was miraculous. Not only that he survived, but that he walked out of the thing. You know. The safety has improved exponentially. It will always be dangerous. That's just the nature of motor racing, and it's why, you know, we lift these guys up and we treat them as heroes, because they do put their lives on the line to, you know, to create entertainment and to bring us sport. It's amazing what they do. Yeah, so the safety has improved massively. The professionalism, really, and the new circuits as well. Just the level. I mean, I remember the first racetrack I went to outside of the UK was Imola in Italy, and it was, you know, those the drop, you know, sort of the plunge toilets, you know, where you have to kind of like pull your underpants forward because you're crouching down and you don't want it to bounce back, and you know, like literally, like it's just a hole in the ground. They were the toilets in the paddock, and yeah, really weird. It was just proper, like really cool, basic salt of the earth racetracks, and now they are state of the art, incredible sports facilities. So that's all improved massively. I think the one thing I miss a little bit during the 2000s, there, you know, huge marketing budgets from the teams meant that there was always a party going on. There was always something cool happening. Red Bull would be throwing a massive kind of party at the end of every weekend, and you know, I say it's vocation, not vacation, but sometimes those parties made you feel like you were on the greatest holiday of your life. And I'm probably too old to enjoy them now, even if they still did them. But as a young 20-year-old, you know, touring the world and experiencing all of that, that was a good time. That was a really good time. But that's when companies have money to burn on marketing, and they just don't have that anymore. So yeah, I think I kind of miss those days of less responsibility. Those were days where I didn't have to get up and you know, put my face on TV, so I could turn up not looking so hot. Can't get away with that now.
Do you have a cool party story? Do you have a cool F1 party story?
I have so many, and I can't tell you any of them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I tried.
Keep it for the
Will.
book. Keep it for the book.
Keep it for the book. Fine. When we have you on and you get this book out, we have to get at least one story, because we'll have you on if you get this book.
Oh man, there are stories. There are stories. There are such stories.
And something maybe to add on to, something that F1 has improved on over the years, I feel like whether this may be subtle to some, more major for others, is their explosion on social media. How they've kind of, going back maybe 5-6 years ago, they didn't really have a huge social media presence, but now you see them being much more active in terms of digital content, but even on the esports side of things. So that was interesting to see.
And this is all down to Liberty Media's ownership of the sport. I came into the sport when it was very much Bernie Ecclestone's sport, and I will always thank Bernie for giving me a job as a kid straight out of university. And and Bernie took this sport as far as he could, and as far as anyone thought it would ever go, and was always loyal, a great businessman, and really understood what the sport and what the folks within the sport needed. But the world, particularly from a media perspective, was changing very, very fast. And unfortunately, under Bernie's watch, it was just too slow to adapt. And that's because, I talked about Bernie's loyalty. He was incredibly loyal to the contracts that he had with all of the television companies. And he felt that by freeing up social media, by sort of putting investment into the digital output that the sport would do, it would detract from what the television broadcasters were getting for their money. And he didn't want to do that. And you can see where he's coming from. And he's just trying to protect his clients, trying to protect the investment that they've made. But with free-to-air television reducing globally, social is your new free-to-air, and that's what Liberty really understood. And so the increase in the digital footprint that Formula One has is all about bringing in new fans and giving what free-to-air television used to be able to do, but doing it globally through social media.
So, Will, shifting gears here a little bit, the F1 world was kind of hit with a big story not so long ago, and it has to deal with Haas and one of the new drivers they brought on board by the name of Nikita Mazepin. Obviously, I won't get into detail as to what that whole fiasco entails, but it's not the greatest look. Haas was put in a very difficult situation. Given that Nikita Mazepin brings a significant amount of funding to the team, and to a team that desperately needs that funding. In that regard, the team was unable to do too much in terms of reprimanding him. What are your initial thoughts on it when it was all going down, and how do you think it should have been handled?
It's a really difficult one.
Yeah.
Because it's actually really simple, in terms of what's right and what's wrong. Just as a human being, what's right and what's wrong. But unless a complaint is levied with the authorities, then it's very difficult for the sport or for the team to do anything more than give them a sit down and a stern talking to. And his new team boss, Gunther Steiner, has been on the record this week. He has a column on the race website where he said, we're not saying that what he did was okay, and we're not going to let him get away with it. We're educating him, and I think Nikita has a lot of growing up to do, both on and off the track, and you see this sometimes with people who perhaps have lived a life of luxury, where they haven't had to face consequences for their actions. And that has certainly shown itself in the way that he has driven sometimes, the way he's held himself off track as well within the paddock. He's been involved in a number of incidents that aren't becoming. And he has to grow up. He has a hell of a lot of growing up to do. He can't drive the way that he has done, and he can't act the way that he has done, because in the real world that's not on. So I think we'd be naive to believe that a petition, as well natured as it was would have ever had any effect. There's no two ways about it. The funding that he brings has pretty much saved the Haas Formula One team and ensured its survival and its future in the sport. He's not going to go anywhere in the short term, and you just have to hope that he listens to Gunther and takes the education that they are aiming to give him, and that he learns from it.
But you have to imagine that seems like a pretty weird decision, weird place to be in, right? Where this person who provides a lot of funding is not behaving in a certain way, and I mean, I can't imagine what either of us would be in that situation. It seems, as difficult as we've been trying to maneuver it through this interview, it seems like a very difficult situation for that team.
Yeah, and the sponsors and the partners involved with that team are not going to look kindly on it or on him. He hasn't even set foot in the car yet as a driver for that team, and already has brought a lot of embarrassment to that team and its sponsors, and they, I'm sure, will have been on the phone and expressing their displeasure to the team over it. It's an unsavory, very disappointing incident. That how anybody would even think that it's acceptable. Anyway, I just hope that he learns from it and doesn't do anything like that again.
And when you see something like that, or sorry, we know there is video going around of that, and people have been kind of excuse me, we know this is a situation that the team is trying to deal with, but when you hear news of this, how badly does this reflect on Formula One's culture?
I think the culture in Formula One has changed. I saw some comments actually coming out of some racers after the incident, because a lot of people sort of expressed their displeasure with what had happened. And I saw a couple of comments actually from a couple of drivers I would have expected more from, one of whom compared it to James Hunt and a photograph of James Hunt with a pretty girl. And this was a photo shoot in a studio. And there is a world of difference between what is alleged to have happened in that video and a photo shoot with a model in a studio. It's not a case of boys being boys. Hey, lads. It's not. And you can't try and pass it off as that. So I think Formula One itself has taken big steps in recent years, getting rid of the grid girls, and I know from first-hand experience of being in that paddock, there were times. Look again, and we started off the show talking about Lewis and what he's done for our appreciation of the inadequacies that have existed and the inequalities that have existed in this sport for too long. Those inequalities, they extend to women in the sport as well. For too long, just the dolly bird on the side, there to look pretty and hold an umbrella. We have an amazing number of women in this sport who play critical roles in the teams, in the organization of Formula One. And I know from friends that I have and people that I know really, really well, how the culture in the sport was not always great for women. And a lot of them went through some really, really, really bad times, actually. And I hope that we've turned a corner, not just as a sport, but as a society, as a global society, that there are rights and wrongs that exist. And it's just being a good human being and understanding what those rights and wrongs are. And if you're a good person and you know what's right and what's wrong, you don't step over that line. You wouldn't step over that line. And that is the hope, is that, when my daughter is of an age where she's going into the workplace, that she's treated as an equal. It's not a nice thought, but I think that the sport has changed massively over recent years, and I hope that it is a more welcoming place and a more equitable, equal, I should say, environment, or as equal as it's ever been, and hopefully getting more so.
Will, as knowing as you have been around the sport as long as you have, and knowing how much you care about the sport, it's well said on your part on those things, and we can tell that you seem very genuine in hoping that in your answer. I just want to point that out, and I kind of want to switch it to a much more lighthearted question. We've talked about Lewis Hamilton. We've mentioned all these other legendary drivers that have come through the sport. I'm just curious, who's a driver that you've seen or you've covered that you feel is a bit more underrated in terms of how viewers or fans at home have looked at the sport? Who's a guy do you feel who's underrated in the sport of Formula One?
From the current batch.
How about this? I'll say current batch, and maybe if you want, you can also throw in a guy who you've seen over the last 20 years. Twofold
okay.
answer.
So I think that's a really good question. I think Romain Grosjean was really heavily underrated. His junior category performances had him on a very similar level to Lewis Hamilton, but the luck and the chips just didn't fall for him. And it's interesting that he'd sort of become this pariah and almost a joke to a lot of the fans, and then he had his big accident. And the irony of that accident is that it actually allowed him to walk out of the paddock feeling embraced and loved and respected, rather than leaving with his head bowed and his shoulders slumped forward, sort of hunched forward, because it had just become a nightmare for him. And I'm really glad that he got to leave with respect, but it's sad that it took him nearly potentially losing his life for him to gain the respect that he never should have lost. Romain was is an enigma. He had the capability to just thrill and excite, and he had the ability to just frustrate and make you want to pull your hair out at times. But a lovely guy and a brilliant racing driver, and I think quite heavily underrated. It's interesting, actually, if you look at, I think the drivers themselves did a vote on who their top 10 drivers of the year were, and Romain came in the top 10 of the drivers in F1.
Really?
Yeah, for this season. I think he came in at number 8. And I think that's really telling, that the drivers voted him as one of the more impressive drivers of the year, and not just because of his crash, but because of what he was doing with a car that was inherently a dog, and he did some really wonderful things with it. Romain's a really talented guy, and I think you could put Danny Kvyat in the same breath, actually, as somebody who, with the right opportunities and the right kind of level of guidance and everything, would have done bigger and better things than they ultimately did.
We got one last one for you, man, and this one.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, sure. Why not? I love being asked questions.
Does Frank walk around Montreal pretending that he's Lance Stroll?
Oh my God! Holy crap! Holy crap! Will. Our last question to you was going to be: does Frank look like Lance Stroll? You just read our minds. No,
Will, I swear to God.
I swear to God, that's what we were just about to ask you. That is
amazing. People are think we scripted this.
Oh my!
Oh, that's amazing.
Are you serious?
Clip this, my guy. That's amazing.
Oh my God.
Well, thank you for answering that question, because we spent this whole time being like, okay, we have to find a way to ask him.
That's incredible. Honestly, and to answer your question, no, I do not walk around Montreal dressed up like Lance Stroll, but maybe if I get some.
But now I feel like
racing,
you could.
Yeah, but now definitely I can.
Get some Aston Martin swag. And
Aston Martin, exactly.
Walk around town and just be like, hey, what of it? It's totally cool. Just do it.
So here's a question for you then.
Basically, just go to like the most exclusive restaurant in town, right? Like the place you cannot get a reservation at, and just walk in and just be like, hey, can I get a table? And they'll be like, do you have a reservation? No. Okay, this place needs like 6 months reservation. Like, what do you think? I would go, I'm Lance Stroll. Like, Google me if you don't know who I am, and they'll just bring out the picture. Like, oh my God, you're Lance Stroll.
insane.
The
Okay,
problem with that is they'll think you're the son of a billionaire, and and the bill will be massive. So probably don't do that.
Okay, so here's the question back to you, throwing it back to you. How
this is
early?
one of the most amazing things ever. This is one of the most amazing things I've ever witnessed in my life. Like, that's amazing.
How early on in the call did you think of that?
Oh, literally first 20 seconds. I was like, when can I ask this question? When can I get this in? I'll leave it. I thought I'll leave it till the end. Leave it until I say, here's the last question, and they'll say, no, I need to ask you a question first.
Frank.
Okay.
That's insane.
Will,
you know what? You know what's funny, Will?
The Florida series and all of that. And I was just like, yeah.
I was there. I was with you.
You were there, man. We've known each other years.
You know what's funny, Will, is that now, like, throughout the entire season, like, a lot of my buddies and I, we've gotten really big into F1 and we watch it thoroughly or often. And every time Lance puts in a good performance, the group chat's going, "Hey, Frank, you're doing really well today. Hey, you finished P4. Oh, you finished."
I love it. You need to say a bit more. You need to say, you need to do that in between every 2 or 3 words, and then you'll have it like down. Absolutely nail it. How's your friend?
Can I ask us a somewhat serious question about Lance Stroll, since we're bringing him up here?
Of
course. Because this guy, correct me if I'm wrong, he had at least 1 or 2 podium finishes in the last season.
Yeah.
He's showing some promise now. Again, continuing the Montreal lineage of Formula One drivers, seeing Gilles, obviously, seeing Jacques, and now Lance Stroll hopes to continue that legacy.
Well, thank you for all those compliments, Julian. I appreciate it. And I've been working hard all year.
Oh my God, you sound like him a little bit too.
That's great. So just to ask the question, what do you think Lance Stroll's ceiling is in the sport of Formula One? And it's okay. You could be brutally honest as you can. Well, I think Lance Stroll can take it.
For Frank to totally nail the impression, he just has to sound a little more disinterested, and then it'll be perfect. But look, I think it's fair to say that we're probably not dealing with another Gilles Villeneuve, because Gilles Villeneuve's come along once in a generation. And there are very few drivers in the history of Formula One that have the same level of skill and ability and just grace and talent as Gilles Villeneuve had. So that's a high bar.
Mm-hmm.
But look, Lance he's competent. He's won championships. He's on his day can be incredibly quick. What I said earlier about, I joked about Frank's impressions needing to sound a little less interested, is I think sometimes Lance doesn't apply himself as well as he could do. He has so much talent and so much ability, but sometimes I question, like, is he in it for the right reason? Does he really want to be there? There are 1,000,001 other things he could be doing. He comes from a place where that really he could do anything in the world that he wanted to do. So I hope that Formula One is truly what he wants to be doing, because there are times when he just looks like he's just kind of mailing it in, and that's a real shame. I hope that having Vettel as a teammate this year, the responsibility of driving for a brand like Aston Martin, brings the best out of him, because that is best. He's brilliant. I do worry though that with his father owning the team, this thing that he's been trying to escape from his whole life, this whole, well, you're only succeeding in motorsport because your dad's a billionaire and he's bought you the best car and he's bought you the best engine, or he's bought you the best tires, and you wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't, if you were just Joe Stroll off the street, you wouldn't be here, mate. You'd be nowhere. But it's only because your dad is who he is that you're here. And his whole career, from karting all the way through junior formulas, he's had that thrown at him, just to try and stand on his own 2 feet and say, no, I'm my own man. I'm a racer. I'm worthy of this. And now he's at a team that's owned by his dad. It's like that, the ultimate turnaround of everything that he's been fighting against his entire career. He now can't escape. If he wins a race, your dad bought you a team. You got pole position, got pole position last season on a wet track, quicker than Lewis Hamilton. Ridiculous, right?
Yep.
oh no, he's only there because of his dad. And it's true. He probably wouldn't have that seat if it wasn't for his dad. But at least if he was in a team that his dad didn't own, he could come back to that and say, I'm here on merit. Now it's harder. And I feel sorry for him, because the last season and a bit, it's like all of the joy that you used to see in him. And he used to be really just so happy and bouncy all the time.
That's interesting.
It's gone. And I feel sorry for him in a way that everything he's tried his entire career to fight against, he now can't stand on his own 2 feet. And that's pretty sad.
Frank, are you okay? Your ego might have been kind of busted a little bit after you got dressed down by Will Buxton.
Sorry,
are you going to be okay, buddy?
I'll be fine.
He's going to be fine. He can get himself a reservation at any joint he wants. In Montreal, he's going to be absolutely fine.
Oh man,
awesome.
Will, I have to say, the fact that, I mean, even before you pointed out the similarities between Frank Pavan and Lance Stroll, I was already saying this interview with you was one for the books. I really appreciated your time with us. I really appreciate your answers to all of our questions, and just how genuine you come across in this interview, man. Like, I really only pay attention to F1 when it's time for the Canadian Grand Prix, and I watch sparingly here and there to see how Lewis is doing. But definitely, I feel this way, and I hope our listeners feel the same way too. If you're not already, paying attention to Will Buxton's coverage of the sport, you should be by now. Hopefully this interview will change your mind about him. If whatever thoughts you may have about Will Buxton, thank you so much for joining us here on the WaterBoys.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on. I've really, really enjoyed it, guys. It's been great. And as I said, it's nice to see some different faces and talk to some people.
Yes.
In lockdown, it's lovely. It's really nice. It's great. So thank you so much. This has been a joy.
Will Buxton on the WaterBoys podcast.